Well, Andrew Lewin is the Labour MP for Welwyn Hatfield and the chair of the UK Trade and Business Commission. Andrew, thanks for joining us. What kind of relationship are you hoping for with the EU?
So I think it's really important that we have a stronger relationship. I am a pro-European. I was elected on that basis. I think we've come quite a long way in our first year in office, and the speech today by Nick Thomas-Symonds was significant because we want to go further and faster on things like the SBS deal, which is going to reduce barriers for companies importing to the UK, to break down so much of that red tape that has been created by the act of leaving the European Union and leaving the single market in the first place.
And what is your response to those who say that this is all part of a process of trying to undo Brexit?
Well, I just don't think that is the case at all. We have a very clear manifesto commitment as a Labour Party that we are not planning to rejoin the single market or the customs union in this Parliament. This is about making practical steps forward that are good for business and are good for the economy and good for young people as well. So one of the things I'm particularly passionate about is youth mobility. And we are now in negotiations with the European Union about having a youth experience scheme, a visa scheme for people aged 18 to 30 to have the opportunity to go and live and work in Europe and vice versa. And that's something that polls very, very well with the majority of the British public. It seems a positive thing.
Nigel Farage has said, and I quote, that Labour seem to be trying to betray Brexit by aligning with EU rules on trade without any debate in Parliament. And he also says, and I quote, that is going back on a promise Labour made to the electorate. What's your response to that?
Well, look, I don't recognise that at all. And what is fascinating about what Nigel Farage is saying, I think is so out of step with the British public. In his speech earlier this week, he said he's ready to do deals with the Taliban, but he's also said he wants to rip up the deal that we've made with the European Union. And I think that is a long way from the mainstream of political debate in this country and where the majority of voters are. Whether people voted leave or remain, they recognise that Brexit has done economic damage and they want to see those relationships rebuilt. And that's what this government is in the process of doing.
There is also an ongoing debate as to actually where the bureaucracy is coming from. And I know Nick Thomas-Symonds and many in the government would argue that our current relationship imposes unnecessary bureaucracy on businesses. But Nigel Farage says it's the EU that is imposing this bureaucracy.
Well, look, it was the last government signing a bad deal that has actually imposed these barriers, and that, the Conservative Party, shouldn't be forgiven for that. What's happening now is that we've had a reset in the relationship. We've got a UK Prime Minister and a government that is mending our relationships with our EU partners and working together on things of mutual interest. I talked about youth experience and the SPS deal. There are also conversations about getting young people back into the Erasmus scheme. So positive steps forward after many years of drifting apart.
And on the issue of food standards specifically, which Nick Thomas-Symonds has been saying we need to have a more pragmatic approach on, can you give me an example of where there is bureaucracy that is harming British businesses currently?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the bureaucracy comes from the checks at the border that have been imposed since we left the single market. And essentially, it just means that produce takes far longer to get into the country. And in some cases, it doesn't make it at all because businesses have looked at this, particularly small businesses, and said it's not worth the paperwork or the delays for us to export into the EU anymore. So simplifying those rules, getting into an aligned position on them, dynamic alignment is the thing that we talk about, is going to make a material difference, particularly to smaller exporters in the food and drink industry.
And the government say talks on a permanent deal with the EU will begin this autumn. How long, realistically, Andrew, do you think it's going to take?
Well, I'm not privy to the exact details, but as a backbench Labour MP, I would say the sooner the better. I want to get into these negotiations. The May summit was a really significant step forward. Pleased to hear the speech today from Nick Thomas-Symonds. Let's get going because it's going to bring mutual benefit to both the UK and the EU.
Andrew, really appreciate your time. Thank you. Andrew Lewin there, the Labour MP for Welwyn Hatfield and the chair of the UK Trade and Business Commission.